Hello everyone, so this is a short update on my Ruby application, which is kind of like a Unity version checker. The first change that I made to this is I put these into classes just because of the way that I was working with the GUI interface and everything, putting the game project information and the version information into classes made it much easier to pass around back and forth. And also just printing out some of the information, like I was doing it to a text box before, so I was having to like keep track of, hey, have I displayed the project name yet and all that. Well, if you just put these in classes, then you don't have to worry about that anymore. So that's basically the only thing that I changed in the core project file. So now it just returns a game project list, which is basically an array of game projects right here. So I declare that up front, and then I just keep adding. I create a new game project object instance, and then I just assign the name. Then I keep track of the versions, because a game project can actually have multiple versions if there are multiple configuration files. So that's one of the things that this checks for, is like, hey, this thing has multiple editor files, configuration files. You may want to clean those up. So the GUI is what I worked on most. So I'll go ahead and fire it up real quick just to give a quick demo here up front. And again, this is using Ruby Gtk which you can get. Just install Ruby from rubylang.org, and you can install GTK by doing the gem install GTK3. So the interface kind of looks the same right here. I was just doing some debug testing right here, but I ended up getting the table working, the GTK3 table, which took quite a bit of time because there isn't a lot of good documentation. Just a little bit of documentation. Most of the GTK documentation, especially the GTK3, the latest version, was written for like C++. It wasn't written for Ruby, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, you can click check. So now, instead of the text field right here, it actually displays all my game projects in this little table. And like I mentioned in the previous video, what I wanted to do is have it where if you have an out-of-date version of Unity as defined by the configuration files, I wanted to show up in red. So that's what I got right here. These versions are out of date. So that's sort of just a clue or a notification saying, hey, you need to go and update. Now here's one, Kitty's Adventure. It has two configuration files. It's probably like an editor file or something. So that's something I need to go in and clean up. And Marching Band Simulator, even though it is the latest version, it's just in multiple files. And the other thing that I mentioned last time that I wanted to do is like have a way to compile all my games or selected games. So I actually have a start on that now. So like say I wanted to like do something with Bomb Squad and Ichiban Sokoban and Jewel Swapper. So I checked those. I got all these little checkboxes, and I can click Display Selected, and it will actually show you the games that I've selected here. So now, in a future update, I can use some of the previous code that I used to automatically compile using the command line Unity interface, and just pass in these folders for Bomb Squad. So the hard part was just getting it so that it recognized these checks. One other thing is, and this is what I was testing earlier, I have a game called Aoi Maru, and I actually changed the folder name for that just as a test. One of the most difficult things with this was getting this table to update correctly. So this should be Aoi Maru with a U. And of course, it's not going to update yet, but if I press check again, then it's going to update. It is going to rebuild all these checkboxes as well, so it's going to do a complete refresh. So you're going to lose any that have been checked. One thing that I want to do is like have like a check all button, so to check them all, or check none, something like that. So yeah, I'll just look at the code really quickly. I spent quite a bit of time on this tonight just because of the information wasn't good. I'll go ahead and show the websites that I found. So in the previous video, I mentioned that there wasn't any Ruby GTK documentation. Well, that's not correct. There is some, but it's not great. I found on this main gtk.org documentation right here, it does have, and I guess I've been using the wrong terminology. It's called language binding. So I guess if you have like a library and you have that library converted, or I'm not sure what the correct word is, but if you have it so other languages can use that, the specific APIs for those specific languages are called language bindings, apparently. So they got quite a few languages here. And right here you can see Ruby, but you can also do Python, Perl, and all this other stuff. I'm not sure what the GNOME footprint means. Oh, official GNOME binding. So I guess that's actually developed by the GNOME people. GNOME. So if you use any of these other ones, I guess it's by just third-party or open source projects. But they do have Ruby. Partially supported and support. So Ruby supports GTK3, I guess, officially. But if you click on this, then it'll take you to this same site that I already had loaded here. So it's like Ruby. Oh, wow, this is actually fairly new. 2018 808, and it's currently September 8th. So this was about a month ago. But the documentation is for GNOME 2 right here. So not all the stuff is updated, which is sort of sad. So here's an API reference. I was working, so you can just click Ruby GTK right here. And this will give you, like in the previous video, saying, hey, from the official, and I don't know if I have it in the other window. Yeah, this is it right here. So this is the official GNOME documentation right here, API reference, and GTK3. I guess they're working on GTK4. I'm not sure if it's officially out yet, but I'm not touching it because it's not supported by Ruby. But here's the official GNOME documentation, and like what is it? Like I was using GTK Grid. And the problem is these aren't in the format of Ruby, which you can kind of guess what the methods names were. Like I mentioned in the previous video, you just get rid of the GTK and the class name, and you can kind of figure it out, but it isn't the official. So this works pretty good because this gives you the exact names that you need to use, like GTK window. And here's all the methods and properties, which this works pretty well. But if I was working with GTK dialog earlier, and a lot of this stuff, like the example, this one actually has an example, which is nice, but this is all deprecated. If you even try to use it, it's going to tell you this is old stuff, use the new format. So this isn't helpful. I mean, it is somewhat helpful to give you an idea. I did find some other examples. This one's pretty good, said Lemo on GitHub. And this is officially GTK3. I think this was the original tutorials that I found. But there's a lot of stuff on here, like adding the search bar. But they use this other like format for widgets, which I don't know. I guess it's good to put all the properties, styles, and everything in an XML file, but I really didn't want to get into that right now. I just wanted to get something going, something simple. I didn't want to get into editing XML just to do widgets. So that's a pretty good demo right there. So anyway, back to my user interface. I'll do a quick code review. So this isn't the best, but I created these global variables. I can go back and check this later. But yeah, one for the table, the GUI table, one for the track checkboxes and one to track the games, because I don't want to keep calling my main core engine every time. I just want to keep those game objects around without having to like read the configuration files every time. So that kind of caches that, I suppose. This one took me a long time to figure out. I kept looking for how to clear a table, how to remove everything. It's pretty simple, but I had to like figure out the code myself. But you basically just access the children of your table, GTK table, and go through each and remove it. Pretty simple, but there wasn't a method in the API that does that. This is something I started I'm not using. So once you get down to the code, I broke these into functions. This is make project row, game project row. I'm going to skip over that for now because the first method that gets called is make window. Same stuff from the previous video, but I did modify when you get down to this button for clicked. So this is like the dummy data that I had in there just to fill something in. I'll probably end up taking this out or just putting a information message. The format of tables, adding stuff to tables is really weird. You like pass the widget to you call the attach method. There's also an attach default, so you don't have to put this extra stuff. But you pass in like the left value, the left cell, the right cell, the up cell, and the down cell. So you get a lot of this row plus one because you want it to be between this row and the next row. It's weird. Why don't you just say insert at? I don't know. I guess you could write your own insert at method. But anyway, when you click this button, it's going to remove all the entries, all the rows from the table. It's going to go to my core engine right here, and it's going to grab all the game projects which are stored in these game objects, game project objects, which has the name of the project, version, number information, if it has a Unity package manager folder and if it has a temp folder to clear those up. I haven't finished this yet, but this was basically just going to compare the current version, the game project version, with the currently defined version of Unity, but I kind of did that a different way, so I may end up removing that. But anyway, we're going to clear out the checkboxes. We're going to clear out the game array whenever you press clicked. And then for each game project, which is returned from display projects, my core, then it's going to get the game object, and then we're going to call make game project row. We're going to pass in. Actually, I don't need this anymore since I am using global variable. I was a little bit confused, like since this is in a function now, it used to just be in a script, but now that it's in a function, I'm not sure if it can, like these other methods would be able to access the table. So I went ahead and made that a global variable. But I'm going to pass in the game number. I keep track of the game number. I'll set it to 0 and increment by 1. Then the actual game. I just keep track of the game number so I know which row that I'm on. So when I call make project row, game project row, I was doing a lot of testing. It took me a lot of time to figure this out. But I'm basically going to create a new checkbox. It's called check button in GTK. So be aware. I was looking for checkbox in the API documentation. It's really check button. So I'm going to add that to my checkbox array. Then I'm going to add a row, that checkbox to the new row. Oh, and here's an important one. I spent a long time trying to figure this out. Apparently when you dynamically add things to your table, you need to call show on it. If you set all your widgets before the window is shown, then you don't need to do that. But if you're dynamically, like on a button press, you need to actually call show or else it won't display. It took me a very long time to figure that out. So it's the same for the label. I'm basically just going to, with this new game array, I'm going to load in all the game project information, each game project. So this probably isn't the best, but it's kind of like two parallel arrays. So this is dependent on the checkbox array being in sync with the game array, which shouldn't be a problem, I don't think, in most cases. So yeah, we're just going to add the name of the game and a label on the next row. Then I'm going to take that version information. Like I said, there can be multiple versions. That's why I'm doing an each on the versions. Then I'm going to take that version, and this is a little test to see if there's anything currently in there. If there is, I'm just going to add a comma to keep the version number separated visually. And then I'm going to add that version number. And also, here's where I do that check to see if it isn't the current Unity version that's defined in that core as a constant. Then we're going to change the background color to red, like a light red. And that was what you saw on the previous screen where the background was highlighted. I think there's other ways to do this. This might not be the currently accepted way to do this. I think there's a new style way of doing this that looks like CSS, which I think is pretty cool. I just wish there was one set of GTK 3 documentation for Ruby, which I don't know. I guess if I wanted to give back to the community, I could write that documentation myself. But anyway, it just takes a while to figure that out. And we're going to add that version information and show it as well. It's important to put spacing between your rows, or else everything will be very cluttered. One thing that I thought was disappointing is that by default the rows are really close together, and there's not just a set row height. You actually have to specify it per row. The other thing that I was going to mention is when you're defining your table, in the official GTK documentation, you actually have to set the number of rows and columns. That's what this 1 is. And this false is something called homogeneous. I think it keeps the columns the same size. I'm not worried about that. I think it's by default. But it will scream at you if you don't put anything in here. But it seems like in Ruby, it doesn't matter what you put in there. I guess it's because Ruby is kind of dynamically allocated anyway. I guess in C or C++, it has to manually allocate the memory for that. But in Ruby, it's dynamically allocated. So in my experience, it doesn't matter what you put in that right there. The only thing that matters is what you put in these when you do this attach defaults. And it will scream at you if this second number isn't bigger than the first number. It's got to be between two values. I guess you could do weird things like put it in between 1 and 5, and it'll pick somewhere between there to put it in. I don't know. The documentation really isn't that great on that. But anyway, I'm using the same down here code. So for my scroll window, instead of putting in text results, I'm just doing scroll window add table games. So that just adds the table. I did a lot of testing with trying to remove the table and add the table when I was trying to figure out how to get the graphical components to show, but all I had to do was call show on those widgets. And the final thing that I did was I added a new button called display selected. And when you press display selected like I showed earlier, then it's going to loop through each checkbox and checkbox array. And then, so here's one difference between the Ruby implementation and the default GTK, C documentation API. In the C API, I think it's called get active or something. I can't remember exactly what it is. But in Ruby, it's just active question. So that's one difference. So I never would have figured that out if I hadn't looked in one of the examples. So this is where I'm building that string. It's just going to get all the game names of that have associated checkboxes that are checked. So this is where I was talking about. It's two kind of synchronized parallel arrays, which isn't great. I guess I could build a new data structure called checkbox game or something. Then I put a game and a checkbox, and then I would ensure that those are consistent. But just for this, I mean, that's something for a later update. Just for my use, just a little tool for me. I'm pretty confident that these will stay in sync right there. So this is another thing. This is the code that I just worked with earlier. And if you use the GTK2 format, this will not work. So this is the new GTK3, so I was able to find an example of how to do a message box. It's pretty nice. It's just 3 lines of code to display a message box, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so that's basically it for just a short code review of this. Yeah, there's still stuff that needs to be added to this, but I like it. I need to get these words, the labels, like aligned to the left side. But it is a pretty nice tool just to show me which of my games need to be updated with the latest version of Unity. So thanks everyone for watching.